We'll begin with an opening chant. Om Vanme Manasi Pratishtita Mano Me Vachi Pratishtitam Avira Viramayeti Vedasya Ma'a Nishtaha Shrutam Me Ma Prahasi Anena Ditena Horatran Sandhatami Ritam Varishyami Satyam Vadishyami Tanma Mavatu Tadvakta Ramavatu Avatu Mam Avatu Vaktaram Om Shanti 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 Om. May my speech be one with my mind, and may my mind be one with my speech. O thou self-luminous Brahman, remove the veil of ignorance before me, that I may behold thy light. Do thou reveal to me the spirit of the scriptures. May the truth of the scriptures be ever present to me. May I seek day and night to realize what I learned from the sages. May I speak the truth of Brahman. May I speak the truth. May it protect me. May it protect my teacher. Oh, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So friends, today we are going to be celebrating memories of great monks. And the Swamis that I'll be spotlighting for you are Swamis Vireshwarananda, Holy Mother's disciple and former president of the Ramakrishna order, Swami Nirvanananda, disciple of Swami Premananda, former vice president of the order and a Brahmagyani, and Swami Nityaswarupananda, Holy Mother's disciple and the founder of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. In 1979, during my first pilgrimage to India, Swami Vireshwarananda, disciple of Sarada Devi, was president of the order, and he was president from 1966 until his Mahasamadhi in 1985 at the age of 93. When Swami Vivekananda first returned to India from the West, Vireshwaranandaji's father was in the crowd. He picked up and placed his son on his shoulders to see India's hero, and the child sat gazing on Vivekananda for about 10 minutes. While in India, I heard from a close devotee that years later, when he was in school, he was a cross-country runner. He used to stop by the Madras Mat to pick up the sports news. Every day he did this without asking anybody about the Mat. One day, an older Swami asked him why he came every day without inquiring about the organization. He then gave him a book, perhaps the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And after reading that, the future Swami Vireshwarananda became interested. President Maharaj was very close to my guru, Swami Pravrajika, and had helped guide him from the Bellarmine side in the formation of the Southern California convents in Hollywood and in Santa Barbara, which were officially established in 1947 with formal brahmacharya vows administered. And we will be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the convents in America in 2022. So when we met Swami Vireshwarananda, we felt we belonged to him. I was accompanied on my trip to India by a Sannyasini and another brahmacharini. And he belonged to us. He was family. The first day we met him, he was seated in his room at Bellarmine, surrounded by devotees and smoking an enormous hubble bubble. Have you ever seen one of these? He asked with a twinkle in his eyes as he greeted us. No, I replied, completely flabbergasted at the size of his 4-foot hubble bubble. So in like manner, one of our convent's ritual gifts to him, whenever a Santa Barbara devotee traveled to Bellarmine, was a number of packs of 555s, his favorite Indian cigarette. President Maharaj did not, advise us in spiritual matters. He doesn't instruct us. He looked upon us as his own daughters. And we took the afternoon coffee with him, and his intimate, sweet, and loving interactions with us were as uplifting, enveloping, and refreshing as a bath in the sacred Ganges. No need for any spiritual discourse. His presence exuded spirituality. To Pravrajika Brahmaprana, one of our Hollywood nuns, on a previous pilgrimage, he shared 2 reminiscences, which I would like to share with you. First, a vision Holy Mother had had in Jairambati after Sri Ramakrishna had passed away. The Divine Mother appeared to her as a young girl, 8 or 10 years old. She was sweeping with one hand, and with the other hand, she was pouring a liquid. Holy Mother asked her, "What are you doing?" The Divine Mother answered, "I am sweeping away all this rubbish. Then I will sprinkle nectar, amrita, so that a new crop will grow." President Maharaj then explained that the rubbish was atomic warfare and conflict, the nectar, Sri Ramakrishna's message, and the new crop, a new civilization. At that time, President Maharaj also reminisced. Maharaj, Swami Premananda, gave me a lesson in obedience in the presence of Swami Premananda and Shivananda, he said. Maharaj said to me, "Go and see if the water of the Ganges is salty." During May and June, the seawater comes upriver with the tide. President Maharaj continued, "I had just had my bath in the Ganges before evening vespers, so I told him, 'Yes, Maharaj, the water is salty.' 'That is not what I asked you,' said Maharaj. 'Go and see if the water is salty.' President Maharaj then explained to us, I went again to the Ganges, tasted a little of the water, and then came back and reported to Maharaj. 'Yes, Maharaj, the water is salty.' Then President Maharaj explained the lesson he learned. If Maharaj had asked me, 'Is the water salty?' it would have been all right just to tell him yes. But he had asked me, 'Go and see if the water is salty.' So in this way, these great teachers trained their disciples, who in turn trained theirs. Spiritual life, we know, is the razor's edge. If we're careless or inattentive, we can fail to reach or fall from the goal. Self-knowledge is attained by astute self-awareness and self-discipline. One day during our pilgrimage, Swami Vireshwarananda shared a story of one of the direct disciples. One day, Swami Akhandananda came here to Bellarmine from Bagha Bazaar, he said, a distance of 4 miles. He wanted to leave after lunch, but I wanted him to leave after tea. He said no. I said, if you stay, I will give you something you have never had before. His curiosity was aroused. What can you give me? I have had meals with princes and rajas. I have tasted palau with pomegranate and onion juice. President Maharaj told us, I got him to stay. Then I put coffee in a container of water and salt. At tea, I poured it into a glass and gave it to him. He liked it and said, no, I have never tasted this before. You were right. It was Swami Akhandananda's first taste of iced coffee. President Maharaj then confided to us I served Swami Vivekananda a can of American coffee on his puja birthday. So that is how the Bellarmine tradition started of serving coffee to Swami Vivekananda on his puja birthday anniversary. Swami Vireshwarananda had a certain presence, even with the direct disciples. Swami Lokeshwarananda shared during his 1989 stay at the Santa Barbara convent. Swami Lokeshwarananda was the then head of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture. Once Akhandananda went to stay at a comfortable devotee's house in Kolkata. Vireshwarananda went there in Calcutta and asked him to come to Bellarmine. Swami Akhandananda asked, "Why should I go there? I have everything here, all the conveniences." Vireshwarananda ji answered, "Yes, it is true that we monks at Bellarmine do not have all these conveniences, but we are very happy to be in the mat that Swami Vivekananda founded." When Akhandananda heard these words that Swamiji had founded, it immediately reminded him and he exclaimed, "Oh, I will go there tomorrow." Years later, in 2009, when I was in India, Swami Atmaramananda, who was the head of the Coimbatore Center when I knew him, and at that time he was the attendant to the then president of the order, Swami Gombirananda, shared with me one of Swami Vireshwarananda's personal habits. Always, when alone on his veranda or in his room, before smoking, he would hold a cigarette in both hands and offer it up to the divine 3 times before smoking. It is in these private, touching moments that we find laid bare the simple soul of a great sadhu's inner life. When we go on pilgrimage, not every encounter or personal reminiscence we receive from great souls is meant to be shared. Some interactions with these disciples of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna or Holy Mother are so personal, so elevating. They touch us so deeply, we can only weep. This was the case for some pilgrims who had come into contact with Swami Nirvanananda, disciple of Swami Brahmananda, and vice president of the Ramakrishna order in the 1970s. One disciple of Swami Premananda and former nun shared with me that she had never before felt such a blessing as came from him. He had caressed her head 3 times and looking straight into her eyes, affirmed, "I see God in you." She wept from the sheer impact of such words coming from a Brahmagyani, a knower of Brahman. And months later, from the memory of this experience, as she related it to me. Of all the Swamis, my sisters and I were destined to meet in 1979, and I was accompanied by a Pravrajika and another Brahmacharini. Suji Maharaj, Swami Nirvanananda, was the only one I felt I must meet and see firsthand. Why? He was a close brother disciple to my guru, Swami Premananda. Both my guru and Suji Maharaj used to go into Maharaj's room and take cigarettes from his mantle, and they would smoke outside. And they both tried to quit smoking many times, and finally they both succeeded. My teacher used to say it was easier to have samadhi than it was to give up smoking. So as Swami Brahmananda's attendant, he had witnessed many intimate encounters with the direct disciples of Ramakrishna and Sarada Devi, Sri Ramakrishna's virgin wife. For example, he related at one time, "On many occasions, I had the good fortune to witness Maharaj, Swami Brahmananda, offering pranams to Holy Mother at Kashi, at Bagh Bazar, and at Billermat. I used to observe that in the presence of Mother, Maharaj was never himself. He would be overcome with emotional fervor, his legs tottering. He could not stand steadily. His whole body used to tremble. Somehow he would manage to offer pranams, and then he would hurry away. Often at Kashi and at Holy Mother's residence at the Udbodhan house, he could not even climb upstairs. He would stand downstairs and, raising his folded hands to his head, convey his pranams to her. He continued, I have seen Babaram Maharaj, Swami Premananda, Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivananda, and others too, offering pranams to Mother. They too used to be almost in a similar state, but not quite to that extent. To be Swami Brahmananda's attendant was an extraordinary privilege and sadhana. But in the beginning, not even Suji Maharaj recognized this to its fullest extent, as he himself later related. He said, it was March or April of the year 1915, I was then engaged in attending on Maharaj at Bellarmat. I used to notice monks and brahmacharis of my age set out for tapasya with the permission of Maharaj. They would go off to the Himalayas or elsewhere and spend a year or so there in spiritual practices. One day, I too approached Maharaj and asked permission to go for tapasya. At once he said, what else are you doing here? Your serving here is much more effective than tapasya. You don't need to go anywhere else. In spite of these words, Suji explained, when I kept pressing him for permission, he suggested that I obtain permission from Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivananda. As soon as Mahapurush Maharaj heard my prayer, he exclaimed, are you crazy? Where else will you go for tapasya? Be assured that everything can be gained by just serving Maharaj. He was the spiritual son of Sri Ramakrishna, recognized by Ramakrishna as his mind-born son. Still, I persisted with my request, Suji went on. At last he said, Maharaj said, well, go to Babaram Maharaj, Swami Premananda. You may go only if he gives permission. When I went to Babaram Maharaj, his response was the same, but more vehement. He cried out, have you really gone mad, Suji? Don't you see that Thakur, Sri Ramakrishna, dwells within Maharaj? Will you be in such close proximity to the spiritual son of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna anywhere else? And so it came to pass, as Swami Brahmananda lay on his deathbed, he turned to his attendant Suji Maharaj and said in the presence of other monks, Suji, you have served me well. I give you the boon of Brahmagyana. Swami Nirvanananda had received the rare and special boon of the knowledge of Brahman, the highest samadhi, from which one is liberated while living. He had received this from an Ishvarakoti, an ever-free soul. And so it would be anyone's great good fortune to meet such a blessed soul. One naturally wonders, as Arjuna did in questioning Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, the 2nd chapter, verse 64. Krishna, how can one identify a man who is firmly established and absorbed in Brahman? In what manner does an illumined soul speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? And so I also wondered, how does such a realized soul who has been given the boon of the highest experience appear? What is it like to be in their presence? By the time my monastic sisters and I met Swami Nirvanananda in October 1979, he was quite frail and elderly. He lived on the second story of the old Mott building on the Ganges side of the Mott grounds, where Swami Vivekananda had stayed after returning from the West. The Swami's room used to be the old Mott office and library. It was late morning as devotees queued up to make pranam to the Swami, who sat behind a rail at the doorway of his room with his attendant Swami Bodhamayananda alongside of him. When the attendant spotted us, he informed Swami Nirvanananda that 3 disciples of Swami Premananda, his close brother disciple, had arrived from the United States to pay their respects to him. The Swami became excited and requested his attendant to beckon us to come to the front of the line and into his bedroom. We each came inside and knelt before Suji Maharaj. Few words were exchanged, but with each of us, he leaned forward in his chair, caressed our head 3 times with his hands, looked straight into our eyes, and affirmed what he saw in each of us. Words uttered with such certitude and power that could only have come from one who lives in God and sees God within himself and in all living beings. We also could only weep before such a soul and such a profound blessing. Now, more than 42 years later, but still lingers in my mind, is the striking memory of the way this Swami uttered the word I. It came from a place that was so vast, so deep, from another realm completely disassociated from his body. As Narendra, the future Vivekananda, during his Bharanagore days explained to his brother disciples, the I that is implied in I am he is not this ego. It is that which remains after one eliminates mind, body, and so on. Thus, to hear this word I of the Supreme Self uttered by a Brahmagyani is something extraordinary. It is darshan in the truest sense, something that is experienced and leaves a lasting impression. Devotees who lined up outside the Swami's room that day were struck to see us as we left his room, all together laughing and weeping, joyful with tear-streaked faces, the after effect of a never to be forgotten experience. During a later pilgrimage to India, a brother monk shared with me the time he reminded Swami Nirvanananda, who had been Swami Brahmananda's intimate attendant. He had said on Swami Brahmananda's deathbed, Maharaj said to you, Suji, you have served me well. I give you the boon of Brahmagyana. Maharaj gave you this boon. Have you attained that state? Swami Nirvanananda replied, through Sri Ramakrishna's will and the grace of the Guru, I have surrendered everything. But have you attained that state of Brahmagyani? The monk persisted. Swami Nirvanananda repeated, through Sri Ramakrishna's will and the grace of the Guru, I have surrendered everything. Maharaj, have you had Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the realization of the impersonal reality? Again, through Sri Ramakrishna's will and the grace of the Guru, I have surrendered everything. Such a soul has special powers, which he keeps hidden and when necessary uses for the welfare of others. Swami Lokeshwarananda, who was the head of the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture, a disciple of Mahapurushpa Maharaj, Swami Shivananda, shared with me two instances. Once on Swami Brahmananda's birthday, when Suji Maharaj was elderly, his attendants came to his room and said, "Do you know what date this is?" "Yes, it is Maharaj's birthday." "How do you know?" they asked. "He came to me last night and said, 'You have been to so many countries, but you have not been to Japan. I will take you to Japan.'" And indeed, Suji Maharaj had even traveled to the United States to witness the founding of the Santa Barbara Temple and had visited Hollywood as well, and a few other centers, I believe. He did, and we traveled to so many places together. Finally, he bought me a present, a pair of shoes. "Oh, where are they?" the attendants asked. "They are coming soon," Suji Maharaj told them. And sure enough, shortly Swami Bhaskarananda from the Seattle Vedanta Center appeared with a pair of shoes he had recently purchased while in Japan. Swami Lokeshwarananda then shared another story of Swami Nirvanananda's special powers. Once an official was going through some litigation. He had been visiting Bellarmine, but had seen Swami's other than Suji Maharaj. Finally, the day before the litigation, he went to Suji Maharaj, and the Swami said, "What's the matter? Something will be happening in the court?" And before the man, he waved both his hands to the left and right and said, "I will remove everything." The next day, the man went for his court case, but the official said, "Why did you come? The court case has been dismissed." Swami Nityaswarupananda, who lived from 1899 to 1992, familiarly known as Chintaharan Maharaj, established the Ramakrishna Mission Institute of Culture in Kolkata in 1938. He was a hard worker and a taskmaster. He was a perfectionist, down to the quality of food he felt should be served at the Institute of Culture. He was not a sweet, docile Swami. He spoke his mind, but he also cherished beautiful firsthand reminiscences of the direct disciples. One day, Swami Nityaswarupananda sat on the bench outside the old mat and shared freely his thoughts with us. He said, "Spirituality is the degree in which you live, think, and feel religion." On another occasion, he challenged, "Why should we depend on science? Seers discovered the truth by experimenting in the laboratory within. They then declared this truth to the whole world. What does it matter whether science supports this truth or not? Truth is truth, whereas science is always changing because it is based on theory." One day, Swami Nityaswarupananda came to the foreign guest house at Bellarmine to meet with us. And in this picture, that is how he appeared. He was not as meticulous, not as a perfectionist in dress as he had been before. He was in shabby garawas with a bathrobe thrown over and a beret on his head. Very informal. And he explained the inner meaning of an outer ritual that I'll never forget, what we call making a pranam. "Why should you take the dust of someone's feet?" he said. "What is this dust taking? What does it mean? The next time you go to take the dust of someone's feet, do not demoralize yourself by doing it as an external act. Think of the Lord dwelling within. Worship your own self. Stand there with folded palms, close your eyes and meditate on the self, a shining light, Sri Ramakrishna, or however you want. Remember that you are saluting your own self. If you do this, you will lose yourself. The person whose dust you are taking will also lose himself. At first, he will be stunned, and then he will become absorbed. Do not seek for externals. Seek only what is within. Another time, when Swami Nityaswarupananda learned we were about to visit Dakshineshwar, he advised the importance of a particular approach to pilgrimage. He said, when you go to Dakshineshwar, go and visit every corner. Later, you can meditate upon that memory. Remember every nook and corner. I found this advice especially fruitful. Towards the end of Swami Premananda's life, when he could no longer walk to our little shrine in the Santa Barbara Center in the morning, we nuns used to meditate with him in his room. Once after his morning meditation, he explained to us that before he began the body of his meditation, he would mentally revisit specific places of pilgrimage, meaningful to him. And he would relive certain experiences he received at each of those places. Swami explained to us, this is how an aspirant holds and deepens the experience of one's outer pilgrimage. This daily mental process sets up a spiritual charge to the mind. It rekindles and establishes within ourselves a meditative mood that then facilitates deeper meditation that follows. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, as cows after eating their fill of fodder lie quietly down at a place and chew the cud, so after visiting a holy spot or a place of pilgrimage, you must take hold of the holy thoughts that rise in the mind there. Sit down in a solitary spot and think of them till you become immersed in them. Swami Nityaswarupananda, initiated by Sarada Devi, had associated with many of the direct disciples. He described to us his first meeting with Swami Premananda. He said, the first time I met Swami Premananda, I came to Bellarmine after my matriculation examination. I went to Swami Premananda's room to see him because I knew him from times before. He asked, do you want to meet Swami Brahmananda? You just go there to the next room. I went. I was a young boy. I made pranam and just stood there. Maharaj said, do you want to accomplish something spiritual in this life? I was very emotional. Yes. Then he gave me some instructions in Bengali, but 3 things he told me to practice, and he said those in English. You must practice sincerity, simplicity, and truth. I was so young at the time, I thought to myself, have I ever spoken a lie? But as the years go by, I understand what truth he meant. Swami Nityaswarupananda then told us another story. Maharaj used to sit out on the northeast veranda of the old Mat building overlooking the Ganges. He was talking to some people. I still remember what he said on that occasion. Every moment you think of God, that is a blessed moment. All other time spent thinking of other things is a waste of time. About Swami Shivananda, he shared how the transcendent mind becomes the physician for those advanced aspirants who suffer from physical illness. He reminisced. Swami Shivananda was the embodiment of detachment. He was suffering from asthma. When we would go to him, we used to ask, "How are you, Maharaj?" He would say, "Fine, if you are asking about my true self. It is in a state of bliss. But if you want to know about this body, it's in terrible shape. I have not slept all night. It's taking the course of all bodies." Swami Shivananda then disclosed, "Once in Deogar, I was suffering so much from asthma. When the attendants asked me how I was, I said, I had an experience in the night. I felt completely separate from the body. I was detached, watching the body in pain, but I was separate, in bliss." Testimonials such as this are something we can meditate on, remember when we are suffering, and strive to transcend that suffering. Is it possible, we may wonder? Yes, we have seen that grace does come to struggling aspirants who are then elevated above their physical suffering. Swami Premananda, whom Sri Ramakrishna had designated as an Ishvarakoti, an ever-free soul, was known as the mother of the mat. Swami Nityaswarupananda remembered. Swami Premananda was completely an instrument. He had nothing inside him but Thakur. He was completely an instrument. Naham, naham, not I, not I. In this connection, it is said that in whatever direction Swami Premananda looked, that direction became purified. Swami Nityaswarupananda reminisced further about him. Swami Premananda looked after the management of the mat to the minutest detail. Worship of the master, management of the kitchen, taking care of the vegetable garden, and the orchard, feeding the cows. He himself performed with the most scrupulous care and taught the young brahmacharans and sannyasins also to do properly. In all such matters, the procedure that was followed by Babaram Maharaj is still largely followed in the mat. And indeed, that is how Swami Nityaswarupananda got his reputation for being such a perfectionist and a taskmaster, by following in the footsteps of this great direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. Again, Swami Nityaswarupananda. One day, Swami Premananda described to a senior monk of the order how he proceeded with his work every day. He said, "After finishing my meditation and japa, when I come down the stairs of the shrine," that's the old shrine at Velamat, "I utter again and again the mantram of the master, endure, endure, endure. One who endures abides, and one who does not is destroyed." The Swami remembered. One day after the evening service, Babaram Maharaj sat down for meditation in a corner of the southern veranda of the shrine. The usual period of time had expired, but he did not get up. The attendant at the shrine thought he had fallen asleep through physical exhaustion. He called him repeatedly, but there was no response. He then placed a light before his eyes for some time. Babaram Maharaj opened his eyes by and by. The brahmacharan then asked him if he had fallen asleep, on which he began to sing sweetly, "I am awakened and will sleep no more. I am ever awake in the state of yoga. O mother, I have given back to thee thy mystic sleep, and I have put sleep to sleep. He then said to the Brahmacharin, when you see me in that condition, do not call me or cry aloud, but repeat the name of the master in my ears. During Swami Nityaswarupananda's second visit to the West in 1987 to 1988, he shared an intimate story of Swami Premananda that has been preserved by a close devotee. He shared this in the San Diego Center of the Vedanta Society of Southern California. And he shared it in such a way it stunned the devotees. In this connection, it's important to first mention that when Sri Ramakrishna saw young Babaram for the first time, he recognized him as a partial incarnation of Sri Radha and called him Dharadi, companion of my soul. It was in 1915 when Sri Ramakrishna's birthday celebrations took place in the village of Rarikal. Swami Nityaswarupananda, then a high school student, heard that Swami Premananda was coming to attend the celebrations. At a meeting there, a gentleman was speaking on the relationship of the gopis and Sri Radha to Sri Krishna, as described in the Bhagavatam, and describing in great detail their divine love affair. When Swami Premananda was asked to speak, he struck quite a different note. He uttered a stern warning against such discussions. He said that these matters which happened in the lives of Sri Krishna and Sri Radha and the gopis related to an extraordinary supersensuous state of spiritual development. And those of you who are familiar with the Great Master, written by Swami Sarananda, will find those states of development explained in the biography of Sri Ramakrishna. It is a very high state of Mahabhava. He went on, ordinary people whose minds remained at a low level of spiritual growth and whose minds were attached to consciousness of the body and the senses would never be able to appreciate the spirit underlying these love affairs. And truly, this kind of spiritual love was experienced by Chaitanya, by Sri Ramakrishna, by Sarada Devi, by Krishna, by Rama. Ishvarakotis and avatars have experienced these states of consciousness. Swami Nityaswarupananda described, I became completely struck dumb with wonder and silently moved away from the crowd. The next day, he returned and described what he witnessed. In his words, Swami Premananda's arrival had created a stir all around. People from different parts began to assemble at the village to share in the celebrations. The scene I shall never forget, that a spiritual person could exert such a tremendous influence over a vast crowd in the way the Swami did. I have never seen in my life, and I do not expect that I shall have an opportunity to see anything like it again. It was unique. The Swami moved from place to place in the grounds where the celebrations were going on. Groups from different parts of the adjoining villages gathered in different places, and each group continued to play its music in its own way. I was standing near one of these groups, the Swami explained, when Swami Premananda suddenly appeared. The group at once became surcharged with an extraordinary surge of emotion. Then I found to my surprise that Swami Premananda entered the circle and began to dance and share with them the song that they were singing. The spirit of the place suddenly changed completely. The whole group became mad with the excitement of spiritual fervor. They danced and danced and danced, moving round in a circle, their songs repeating the names of the Lord. Practically, it became a spiritual lunatic group, completely absorbed in a devotional mood. The scene continued for some time, and then Swami Premananda became a little calm and silently moved to another place. Swami Nityaswarupananda said, "The scene I saw that day, I have never seen repeated anywhere, in any way. It happened once and only once in my life. I saw with my own eyes what one can become in the name of God. Now, I only read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, how Sri Ramakrishna became immersed in God consciousness while singing and dancing in the name of the Lord." Swami Nityaswarupananda shared a story towards the end of Swami Premananda's life. One day, while Babaram Maharaj was strolling about in the premises of the Math, Sri Ramakrishna suddenly appeared before him in vision and lovingly said, holding him by his cheeks, "Dear moon," a term of endearment, "where will you run away? You are held in the nose by a rope in my hands." Babaram Maharaj did not explain to us the implication of the master's words, but it may be supposed that he had decided to leave this world even before the fulfillment of the trust vested in him by the master, and that the master had reminded him that the end of the rope tying him to this world was in his hands, and he would not release it until he, Swami Premananda, fulfilled his work. This final reminiscence touches us deeply. It brings into stark contrast the greatness of a life bereft of extraneous material possessions. Swami Nityaswarupananda. When Swami Premananda was ill in Deogar, a devotee gave his attendant 4 shirts for his use. When the Swami came to know of it, he scolded the attendant and said, "I have never been accustomed to keeping so many shirts. Besides, it does not become a monk to have so much clothing." When Swami Premananda passed away, nothing but an empty canvas bag and a few books could be found to be preserved in honor of his memory. As spiritual aspirants, we can read the Upanishads, we can read the Bhagavad Gita, we can read the Brahma Sutras and other wonderful scriptures that elevate our minds. But when we come into contact with great souls who are living scriptures, our faith grows and our minds are purified. And we can come into contact with these great souls by reading their biographies. As we relive memories of our encounters with these great souls and their stories of the Ramakrishna incarnation and his companion and his companions, our story changes. Our samskaras are purified as we continue to live in the memory of their holy company. And now I would like to end with a guided meditation to preserve the atmosphere these stories bring to us. Those of you who are seated in a chair, just put your feet firmly on the ground. Those of you who are seated on the floor, make sure your spine is straight, your chest slightly forward. This is a Ahamgraha meditation. close our eyes and begin by taking in 4 deep breaths, breathing in purity and exhaling all impurity. Let us send waves of peace to the north, the south, the east, and the west. Without outer peace, there can be no inner peace. Within the city of Brahman, which is the body, there is the heart. And within the heart, there is a cave. Let us gently place the mind in the heart. Situated deep within, 5 finger spans up from the navel and near the spinal column. Let us approach the cave entrance and enter. There, deep within, shines your chosen ideal, the size of a thumb, seated on the luminous lotus of the heart. Its body is radiant, emanating pure consciousness, loving consciousness, which is light. Allow your mind's eye to rest on the eyes of your beloved, who has experienced the highest realms of consciousness. Your beloved is smiling, full of compassion. Allow your mind's eye to pass from the eyes to the mouth, which has uttered the one truth in so many ways. Now bring your mind's eye down the form to the lotus feet, at which you place your heart's desire. Then up again to the head, and then rest on the full luminous form. Fill the cave of your heart with the luminosity of your beloved's loving compassion. Allow the form to dissolve in the effulgence of 1,000 suns as it fills your chest cavity with the light of loving consciousness, Ananda. It then rises to your throat and head and extends downward into your lower limbs, your feet and your toes. Feel your body is a vessel of loving consciousness, radiating the light of your chosen ideal through every pore of your body. Let that light extend outward and fill the room, pervading everyone and everything in the room. Let it extend outward into the garden, into the street, into the city, the mountains and valleys and beyond. Let it cover the world and embrace all whom you love, strangers whom you have yet to meet, and those whom you dislike or fear. Let the light of your beloved embrace all and extend beyond into space. The light of your Atman is one with Brahman, infinite, indestructible, all-pervading, loving consciousness. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.